And welcome back. It's been a little while since we did an update video, so I wanted to take the opportunity to put a little bit of an update out there, as well as maybe turn this into a little bit of a Q&A, because I've had a couple questions come back from several individuals looking for a bit more information about the battery bank itself. And I got a little bit of an update on the garage side as well. But one of the questions, actually, let me do an update first. I wanted to give an update on the flexible bus bars. If you remember, we switched over to these based on Lithium Solar's video and his sourcing link. And when we put these in, if you remember, we no longer saw the issues with the occasional cell, maybe a cell here and there in each bank under a high state of discharge or high state of charge, showing a significant deviation in its voltage reading compared to its neighbors. And evidently, in every case, when it was that way with the original bus bars, I could come in here, I could measure it with a thermal gun, and I could also be careful and touch it with my finger, and I can feel one post getting significantly warm on that cell that was reading that significant voltage difference. And if you remember, we tried various different types of hardware with the original bus bars, and some stuff was working better than others, but ultimately it would always kind of come back to having one cell or multiple cells in each pack having an issue. Now, it wasn't a problem with all of them, but just a couple of them. So when I saw Lithium Solar's video and ordered these bus bars in, if you remember when we installed them, it cleared up the issue. Well, we've been running them for several months now. So far, the issue is still resolved. So using these bus bars with the factory hardware, by factory hardware I mean the stud, the Allen stud that come with it, or the set screw that come with it, and the nut that came with it. Now we added a washer, stainless steel washer to this when we put the bus bar in, if you remember, but the factory stud, factory nut, our washer, and that bus bar is the combination that so far we've had no further issues with. We've drawn as much as 80 to 90-ish amps out of this bank at any given time, and we're no longer seeing the voltage deviation within the Batrium software. So when I see it either at a charge or discharge, high state, I can look at the health of all 64 cells within the software, and they're all within 1 to 2 millivolts of each other. So it's still continuing to correct that issue. Now, I'm not saying that the factory bus bars that come with them are bad. They do work, and there are several examples out there of individuals, as long as you prep the bars and prep your terminal services and get your prep done correctly, they don't seem to have an issue with it. But again, just to reiterate, we didn't have that voltage deviation issue with all of our cells, just a few cells in the pack. Enough that it warranted trying these flexible bus bars, which again seemed to address the issue in our case. Another question that we had is why we no longer are running compression on our EVE cells. And the reason, or at least our reason for that, what we're using our banks for here is, at least with the EVE cells and this particular manufacturer of these cells, the compression information in their documentation kind of comes off as a recommendation, meaning that if you compress these cells, you're going to increase longevity, or meaning you'll get more charge cycles out of them kind of in the long run. Well, if you remember, when we originally put these banks in, I was running compression. But after thinking about it and kind of seeing how others felt about it, I didn't like the fact of having these cells pushed up against one another without knowing exactly how much compression we were applying. Because these cells, if you remember, when we charge them up, and you'll see it in my videos as well as Lithium Solar's, because I built the kind of similar wooden system together to hold the cells together while they were charging. But when these cells were at a top stated charge, they actually do swell up a little bit, to the fact that you can see in the videos where trying to pull one cell out of that pack without disassembling the holding what was holding the cells together, you couldn't do it. You weren't going to pull one of these cells out when everything was charged up, because they do get a slightly wider when they're in a full state of charge, and they actually will get slightly slimmer as they're discharged. So with that being said, and not knowing how much compression we were going to apply, I elected to kind of do what Lithium Solar did and just not do the compression, do the neoprene on the top and bottom, and this holding that you see here, all this frame is doing is just holding the cells in place, so that way it doesn't get, they don't potentially get pushed off the table. They're just here to hold it. And it keeps you from doing, giving you any excess stress on these bars. Now, with that being said, it means that we don't get the extra longevity or the extra charge cycles out of these cells that Eve documents, but the amount of usable cycles that we do get means that by the time these cells degrade enough where you no longer have usable capacity enough to make it worthwhile to keep them, it's going to mean that battery technology should change enough, at least in higher capacity, or maybe a different chemistry that's just as stable or more stable and higher capacity, that you're more than likely, or at least I'm going to be more than likely, wanting to get rid of these cells at the point in time that they're at end of life and change over to whatever the current latest and greatest battery technology is. So even uncompressed, you still got a long lifespan inside these cells. You have to forgive the noise because the cooling fan on the charge controller that you can see there just kind of kicked in. And to add to that, down here are fortune cells. You can see the holder that they're in. The holder that they're in actually physically prevents you from even putting any compression on these cells. And my understanding is the way Fortune has designed these cells, they don't require compression. They don't need them. And then these are actually EV rated cells. They're rated for a very high discharge and a very high charge rate. I think they're rated for a 1C charge rate, and for a discharge, that would be 100 amps on these cells. And for a discharge rate, I believe they're rated for like 250 amps on a discharge. So they're rated for a high rate of discharge. And you can see the way they've, once again, the way they've manufactured it, they don't require it. It's not needed. Just like with what we've done to the Eve cells, the way the Fortune does it here, you'll see that there's a noticeable gap which allows for airflow to help keep the cells cool. Well, because we're now not running compression and we've got the neoprene in between, you can see we got a nice sizable gap where we can get some airflow in between these cells and help keep them cool should any amount of excess heat be generated. Again, so with that being said, like I said, everything's running fine. One thing that we're still not running on this particular battery bank is any kind of balancer, whether it be active or passive. One thing that I'm noticing is that we're just kind of allowing the bank to keep itself in check, meaning that, yes, there is deviation as the cells are reaching their top end state of charge, and I'm using the long life lithium iron phosphate setting from Batrium, meaning I think it will kick in these long mons to start to dissipate excess energy at 3.5 volts per cell, meaning that when the batteries start to hit that top state of charge, do I see deviation in the cells? Yes. I think I see about as much as maybe 10 or 11 millivolts between some cells as it's reaching top. So what we're doing is we're just allowing the Batrium to turn the long mons on as needed when the cells hit that 3.5 volt mark, and each of these long mons can place about a 2 amp load per cell, meaning if this cell hits 3.5 volts before this one, it will turn this one on up to about a 2 amp load to help keep this cell pulled down while this one continues to charge. It'll do that until we hit our pack voltage. Once we hit our set pack voltage, then the charge controllers themselves will turn off at that point, and the long mons will continue to bleed off any cell that's still above their set threshold until it all stabilizes. Now, what I'm also finding is that during the night, even with the cells being in the state of discharge, is that during the day, once the charging stops, as well as during the night before it starts running a percentage of the house again, usually that 4 to 5 hour time frame is enough for the cells to kind of equal themselves out. So once the charging's done, the long mons get done, and maybe there's still a 5 to 6 millivolt difference between some of the cells. Generally, after a few hours, it's back down to being 1 to 2 millivolt difference, max difference between cells. So the majority of the cells will be kind of matched with each other and be ready to go. Like I said, 1 to 2 millivolt difference for what we're using it here is, as far as deviation, is fine in my book. So again, that was kind of the primary reason why we got rid of the compression. I also want to let you know that, again, we've been running the Fortune banks along with the Eve banks for the last couple of months now. Everything's still working fine. We're still seeing our testing holding true, where again, the Fortune cells have a larger internal resistance than our Eve cells. So we're seeing the bulk of what we need for charge and discharge out of the Eves, in and out of the Eves, and a percentage of what's needed gets pulled out of the Fortune cells. So it's doing a good job of keeping itself balanced at this point. If in the future the balance gets way too big on the top end, we may get a balancer at that point, or I may just take the individual cells that are falling behind, charge them up individually, get them back up to snuff, or maybe even just top balance an entire bank at a time and then put everything back in parallel again. The way we're using our cells, even with the summer months coming up and potentially running up to 2 air conditioners, the house and the garage, it only puts about a 4 kilowatt load on an 8 kilowatt inverter, meaning at most we're pulling maybe 75, 80 amps or so, and that would be when the sun's not as strong, out of the bank. And with the amount that we're pulling out and putting in, because during the night we tend to discharge this bank to about maybe 60% stated charge, and then recover that during the day. Based on how we're using it, which we're not hitting the bank quite that heavy, that deviation is slow and progressing, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. So for now, like I said, everything we're doing, it works, and it works well. And to kind of quote an item that Andy just recently covered in one of his videos, is that at the end of the day, what bars you want to use and how you want to use them and how you want to set your setting up is really up to you. At the end of the day, it's your system. You know best how you're going to use it for. You know what you're going to use it for. So don't take anything I have here as a gospel as to this is how you have to set it up and that's how you have to have it done. It's not the case. My videos are out there to kind of help provide the information, and if it helps you out where maybe you help set you in a direction that maybe you don't want to do something the way I do it, or kind of gives you an idea or maybe confirms a thought that you had, that's great. But again, at the end of the day, it's your system, it's your setup. You set it up how is best and comfortable for you. The Anderson connector did come in for the other negative pack, or the second Fortune cell pack. I just have to get that installed, but it did come in case you were wondering. What is going on with the garage side of the house at this point is that we're still looking at vehicles that are at auction. I've got several vehicles still on a watch list that is literally just waiting for title paperwork to come back to the auction sites before they can give the vehicle an auction date. It's either paperwork or myriad of other things that they have to wait for all the checks to clear. What's going to happen there is I've got several plans on directions that we can take future builds and future projects. It's just going to depend on what vehicle we can get a hold of. Some of them will need a little bit more work than others. If they do, That's great. Gives us some more content, some more items that we can make videos for. But again, I know I keep saying it, and I appreciate your patience. Don't worry. We've got some projects in the mix on the garage side of the house. It's just going to depend on how long we have to wait for an auction date to come up on what we're looking for, and then we'll go from there. But don't worry, I will keep you updated. As far as solar updates, one thing I want to do is look into rebuilding these battery stands here. They worked great. We've had them for years. There's nothing wrong with them. They do get the job done. These stands were originally used with our AGM batteries when we were running that prior to transitioning over to the lithium iron phosphate. What I would like to do is get some heavy duty metal shelving in and do a build very similar to how Andy in the off-grid garage down in Australia has done his build, and also take some notes from Lithium Solar as well. Again, just to kind of make it a little bit more presentable, clean things up in here a little bit, and make things better for the long run. I'd like to have shelving with more centralized bus bars, so when it comes time to add more packs in the future or change packs out in the future, it'll be easier to do that. So again, those are some of my thoughts with that, and just be on the lookout for those videos kind of coming in the future. So I hope that answers at least a lot of the lingering questions as to how things have been going with the two packs tied together, how these new flexible bus bars have been behaving, and again, why we are no longer compressing our EV cells, as well as kind of future projects on the automotive side of the house. Again, things are coming. If you made it this long into this video and you wouldn't mind do so, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. It does help. We're still marching towards that 1,000 subscriber count. We're knocking on the door of about almost 900 subscribers at this point, and that's awesome. Once we can get to that 1,000 subscriber mark, obviously we can monetize the channel at that point and help start generating some revenue, which will go straight into helping make these projects possible and being able to make the content much more readily available. With that, again, if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing. With that, I will let you go, and I do appreciate it. Thank you much. Bye.